Welcome to a close reading of Thomas Carlyle's Past and Present, Book 2, The Ancient Monk, Chapter 3, Landlord Edmund. It is 7 pages long with some notes in the end. All right, let's get started. Some 3 centuries or so had elapsed since Beatrixworth became St. Edmund's Stowe, St. Edmund's town and monastery, before Jocelyn entered himself a novice there. It was, says he, the year after the Flemings were defeated at Fornham St. Genevieve. Much passed into oblivion, this glorious victory over the Flemings at Fornham has, at the present date, greatly dimmed itself out of the minds of men. A victory and battle nevertheless it was in its time. Some thrice renowned Earl of Leicester, not of the de Montfort breed, as may be read in philosophical or other histories, could any human memory retain such things, had quarrelled with his sovereign, Henry II of the name, had been worsted, it is like, and maltreated, and obliged to fly to foreign parts, but had rallied there in new vigour, and so in the year 1173 returns across the German Sea with a vengeful army of Flemings. Returns to the coast of Suffolk, Framlingham Castle, where he is welcomed westward towards St. Edmundsbury and Fornham Church, where he is met by the constituted authorities with posse comitatus, and swiftly cut in pieces, he and his, or laid by the heels on the right bank of the obscure river Lark, as traces still existing will verify. So here Carlyle is telling us a little bit about the origin of St. Edmundsbury, which, as we know from our reading of like Jocelyn's the Camden Society's Jocelyn's edition preface had started with this kind of war. So Jocelyn came there the year afterwards. I have taken some notes about what was going on with this battle. So, because it's surprisingly significant, as we'll see in a little bit. It's also like a nice detour of English history. So, in 1173, King Henry II's own sons, especially Henry the Young King, rebelled against him, supported by the King of France, the Count of Flanders, and various English barons. Flemish mercenaries brought into England by the rebel Earl of Leicester landed in Suffolk. And by the way, as we know, Suffolk is like this right area and it encompasses the St. Edmundsbury, so it's like the larger area that St. Edmundsbury is in. As they marched inland, they were intercepted by loyalist forces and crushed at the Battle of Fornham St. Genevieve. Carlyle mentions this as part of the historical background around St. Edmundsbury and Abbot Sampson's time. The Flemish today, by the way, are the Dutch-speaking people. Dutch-speaking people of northern Belgium, living mainly in the region called Flanders. And I was like, why is this battle so important? And ChatGPT listed a number of reasons, but the ones that stood out to me were these 2. It symbolizes a moral victory for local loyalists. The loyalist forces were mostly local levies, monks, tenants, and smaller barons, ordinary English country forces, defeating elite hired soldiers. Chroniclers like Jocelyn of Brakelond, whom Carlyle uses, saw it as a sign of order triumphing against chaos, over chaos. And also, obviously, this battle protected St. Edmundsbury because the abbey at Bury was wealthy, unfortified, and vulnerable, and so a rebel mercenary army in the area would have been disastrous. And the victory at Fornham preserved the abbey's security, lands, and political importance, setting the stage for Abbot Sampson's later reforms. And Abbot Sampson, as we know, reigned over Edmundsbury for 30 years. Another just total pleasure of European history and English history especially, which is that these things, so in Jocelyn's time and in Carlyle's time, they're talking about this, where was it? This is in Jocelyn's time. So things are happening in the year 1173, and there's some castle there called Framlingham Castle, which you can still find on the map. like this is where Framingham, this little castle icon, is where Framlingham Castle is today. And so you can see it's very close to Bury St. Edmunds. So if they were fortified here, they came to Suffolk, and if they had been able to march, they would have just had, they would have marched inland way more. And then the what Carlyle here refers to as posse comitatus, that is a Latin phrase meaning the power of the country. What it originally meant, medieval and modern England, was the group of all able-bodied men in a country whom the sheriff could summon to help him enforce the law. So this is a civilian militia. It's not like these people are... it's important, like, because we know the castles and whatever, they have knights. But the thing that defeated the Flemish forces were not a collection of, elite English knights. They were all of the men, temporary civilian militia, which is just amazing. And then this river lark. So when we look at the Bury St. Edmunds, when you see this horizontal blue line over here, a little bit below that, that's the river lark. So all of these places still exist. Very, very fascinating. The permanence of England is just incredible. Because I think England, like as or the UK, as we say, like that body, that whole land mass, has not been invaded since the time of William the Conqueror, which is in the year, 1000 or 1100 or something. So we're talking like for 1,000 years, England has not been invaded. It's a castle that somebody's referring to in the year 1173 is still a castle here today. Like, so fascinating. Such an interesting culture. All right, we are going to keep reading on. For the river lark, though not very discoverably, still runs or stagnates in that country, and the battleground is there, serving at present as a pleasure ground to His Grace of Northumberland. Copper pennies of Henry II are still found there, rotted out from the pouches of poor slain soldiers who had not had time to buy liquor with them. In the river lark itself was fished up within man's memory an antique gold ring, which fond dilettantism can almost believe may have been the very ring Countess Leicester, so I assume that's the wife of the rebel Earl of Leicester that tried to invade and was defeated. So they found some gold ring in that river, and fond dilettantism, so this is like the amateur historians of the day, those that like the sort of salacious stories and stuff, they can almost believe that that ring, the gold ring that was found in that river, may have been the very ring Count Leicester threw away in her flight into that same Lark River or ditch. Nay, a few years ago, in tearing out an enormous superannuated ash tree, now grown quite corpulent, bursten, superfluous, but long a fixture in the soil and not to be dislodged without revolution, there was laid bare under its roots a circular mound of skeletons, wonderfully complete, all radiating from a center, faces upwards, feet inwards, a radiation not of light, but of the nether darkness rather, and evidently the fruit of battle. For many of the heads were cleft or had arrow holes in them. The Battle of Fornham, therefore, is a fact, though a forgotten one, no less obscure than undeniable, like so many other facts. Just a pleasure. So I'll start from this last part, which makes me realize something about Carlyle's prose, where he has these persistent, specific opinions, and one of them is like that his view on history and fact itself. And that viewpoint is that even though certain facts in the past happened and they're obscure, they're almost forgotten, there's something special about them, which is that they are still undeniable. They undeniably happened. And that makes them very special in Carlyle's eyes, special compared to anything fiction. Like that difference, the fact that they happen, no matter how faint their present effects may be, is very important to Carlyle, and this is like one of those facts. The fact that this battle now in Carlyle's time, this is like 7 centuries old, if you don't know. So this is like 7 centuries old at this point, and it's very faint, but it happened. And let me see if I wanted to say a couple of other things. So what's going on here with the prose? As we said, I'm just trying to see. Yeah, they found some like various, what do you call these, like little things you find in archaeological sites. They found some of those things in the river, River Lark over here. But the most significant, one of the like astonishing things, something you do not ever, I think, associate with Europe at all, is like they found 5 people. So there was an ash tree, like a huge tree that was to be dislodged. You know, they were probably cutting a tree or dislocating a tree or something. And then under its roots, they found 5. Where did I see 5? Let me see. There was laid bare under its roots a circular mound of skeletons. I feel like I read somewhere it was 5, but am I not seeing it right now? Oh, I just totally made that up. Never mind. So yes, they found a number of skeletons. Mound means like raised a mass of skeletons. They were arranged in a circle where the feet were at the circle and the heads of the people were on the towards the outer edges of the circle, and wonderfully complete. So this is in contrast to, I was going to say, oh, this is not a great way of searching. 1 second. 61. Sorry, I might cut this part out, but like, I actually don't edit my videos that much. But anyway, I thought like the reason that Carlyle is pointing out that it's wonderfully complete is because many of the heads and arms and stuff of the other soldiers have been severed. So they have been, the corpses were not intact, but the corpses of these ones under this tree were intact. And yes, let me see if I want. Another thing that I found interesting is, so Carlyle is saying that at present, so this river Lark that is like somewhere over here now, or over here, this river Lark is at present a pleasure ground to His Grace of Northumberland's. And Northumberland is this red region in the UK over here. Right? So it's weird that like another like interesting part of English culture that like somebody who is some kind of lord or something over here at the top would have a residence all the way down here. So I found that interesting. And did I want to say anything more? Okay, the rest are, we'll see as we continue. Like the St. Edmundsbury monastery itself, who can doubt, after what we have said, that there was a monastery here at one time? No doubt at all there was a monastery here. No doubt some 3 centuries prior to this Fordham battle, there dwelt a man in these parts of the name Edmund, king, landlord, duke, or whatever his title was, of the eastern counties, and a very singular man and landlord he must have been. For his tenants, it would appear, did not in the least complain of him. His laborers did not think of burning his wheat stacks, breaking into his game preserves. Very far the reverse of all of that. Very far the reverse of all of that. Clear evidence, satisfactory even to my friend dry as dust, meaning like there's a lot of historical evidence for this, what he's about to say, exists that on the contrary, they honored, loved, admired this ancient landlord to a quite astonishing degree, and indeed at last to an immeasurable and an inexpressible degree, for, finding no limits or utterable words for their sense of his worth, they took to beautifying and adoring him. Infinite admiration, we are taught, means worship. So Carlyle is now talking about this person that gave St. Edmundsbury its name. So far we've talked about the time of Jocelyn, when Jocelyn started writing. And so when Jocelyn started writing, the year before, the Flemings were defeated at Fornham, so there was a big attack on a close region of St. Edmundsbury, which, if the attackers had been successful, the monastery would have been buried, perished, etc., but that thankfully did not happen. We got some context of that. Now Carlyle is talking about 300 years before this. So because at the time of Jocelyn, obviously there already was a monastery called St. Edmundsbury, right? So now Carlyle is going 300 years before Jocelyn's time to talk about the person that gave St. Edmundsbury his name. That's also the chapter's name, Landlord Edmund. So clearly we get the sense that this Edmund guy's titles have been lost to the past, so nobody's sure, is he a duke, is he a king, landlord, something. He's some kind of like important nobleman who owns the lands that currently St. Edmundsbury is in. And Carlyle is saying in this paragraph that basically his laborers, his tenants, the people that live there, the people of the town, loved their king. And Carlyle is saying this is pretty undeniable based on the historical record. And at this point, he makes an interesting transition here, saying they loved him to an immeasurable and inexpressible degree, and at some point they started beautifying and adoring him, and infinite admiration becomes worship. So Carlyle is showing us like an emotional sliding scale, is maybe not the right word, emotional progression of like how admiration can lead to like beautification, adoration, and at some point if you admire someone to a larger and larger degree, you basically worship them. And so that is like the progression of human emotions in Carlyle's description. Very singular, could we discover it? Very singular, could we discover it? What Edmund's specific duties were, above all, what his method of discharging them with such results would surely be interesting to know, but are not very discoverable now. His life has become a poetic, nay, a religious mythos, though undeniably enough, it was once a prose fact. I love this sentence. As our poor lives are, and even a very rugged, unmanageable one. Just incredible. So Carlyle is saying, like, could we understand, could we investigate what made Lord Edmund so lovable, precisely what he was doing and how he was doing it? And then he's going, well, at this point we really can't, we're too far removed from that time. And he's saying Lord Edmund's life has become more of a poem or a myth rather than fact. So in Carlyle's time, in the 1850s, when you want to understand Landlord Edmund or King Edmund, whatever he was, that's like, you're almost like reading poetry, you're almost reading myth. But he's saying, undeniably, it was once a prose fact. So he's making this like metaphor between the sort of how the admiration becomes worship, like it's gradually becomes worship. So does like prose gradually become poem and myth. So I just thought it's very, very interesting, the analogy between the literary forms and the sort of psychological forms and that they reflect. This landlord Edmund did go about in leather shoes with femoralia and body coat of some sort on him. I thought I had looked this up, but I didn't note it down. Femoralia were a kind of leg covering used in ancient Rome. So it's some kind of clothing. This landlord Edmund did go about in leather shoes with femoralia and body coat of some sort on him, and daily had his breakfast to procure. and daily had contradictory speeches and most contradictory facts, not a few, to reconcile with himself. So he's not, Carlyle is very much bringing this poetic, mythic Landlord Edmund to reality. He's saying the man wore leather shoes, he wore the kinds of clothes that we recognize, and he's saying he was dealing with contradictions and bad speeches. He was in the thick of life. He was dealing with whatever life was throwing at him at those times. Edmund, for instance, instead of reconciling those same contradictory facts and speeches to himself, which means subduing, I don't know why it says for instance. Well, okay, let me restart. Edmund, for instance, instead of reconciling those same contradictory facts and speeches to himself, which means subduing, and in a manlike and godlike manner conquering them to himself, might have merely thrown new contention into them, new unwisdom into them, and so being conquered by them, much the commoner case. In that way, he had proved no saint or divine-looking man, but a mere sinner, an unfortunate, blamable, more or less diabolic-looking man. No, Landlord Edmund becomes infinitely admirable in his sleep. Is it saying, no Landlord Edmund becomes infinitely admirable in his sleep? Okay, so here what Carlyle is saying is that it would have been easy for Landlord Edmund to, as life was throwing him, contradictions and various kind of problems, he could have easily been the kind of man that contributes to those problems. So he takes 10 problems, gives back 11 problems. He could have easily been that, but Carlyle is saying he was not that kind of man. Landlord Edmund is the person who did the work of reconciling when presented with challenges, of actually resolving, subduing the challenges, of creating order out of the chaos that life was throwing at him. And in such a way, he was more a divine-looking man. He assumes Carlyle. He was more godlike in that sense. So he could have easily merely thrown new contention to them, new unwisdom, and he could have been conquered by them. Interesting, this phrasing, how as life throws chaos, problems, etc. at you. If you contribute to them, Carlyle thinks you're being conquered by them. But Carlyle is saying this man was no such man. And I think this last sentence means, well, clearly since Edmund became infinitely admirable, that did not happen in his sleep. Edmund worked for it. Edmund really gave his all to resolving the chaos and the problems that life was throwing at him. That is what made him special to people. With what degree of wholesome rigor his rents were collected, we hear not. Still less by what methods he preserved his game, whether by bushing or how, and if the partridge seasons were excellent or were indifferent. Neither do we ascertain what kind of corn bill he passed, or wisely adjusted sliding scale, but indeed there were a few spinners in those days, and the nuisance of spinning and other dusty labor was not yet so glaring a one. So he's saying we don't know about Edmund like the kinds of data that Mr., the fictional friend of Carlyle's, dry as dust, might want to collect. We don't know what laws he passed, what bills he passed. We don't know precisely how he was managing the little economy. I think a little bit later, Carlyle is going to basically say, we don't know these details, but we know the most important thing, which is that the people loved him, they sanctified him, they admired him. So it's quite the contrast of as you look at a historical king or person in the past, is the thing that you focus on the little machinations of government that they were involved in, or do you focus on whether the people loved him? Interesting perspective. How then, it may be asked, did this Edmund rise into favor, become to such astonishing extent a recognized farmer's friend? Really, except it were by doing justly and loving mercy to an unprecedented extent, one does not know. The man, it would seem, had walked, as they say, humbly with God, humbly and valiantly with God, struggling to make the earth heavenly as he could, instead of walking sumptuously and pridefully with mammon, leaving the earth to grow hellish as it liked. Interesting how, well, Carlyle is saying there's no doubt that he was loved by all, but we don't know the mechanism of how he was loved by all, except the only thing that we can deduce is that he was governing justly and mercifully. And beyond that, it's also interesting how this walking humbly with God is emphasized here, because clearly we don't have King Edmund's books on governance. He's not a vain or self-important king. He did not leave the sorts of here are my amazing thoughts and treatises kind of works behind. Maybe he would have written them. He was obviously murdered at the age of 29. Maybe he would have done that later, but at least up to that point, a person who was governing such wide area and having such good relationships with his people did not have a magnum opus somewhere. So he was a humble man who was not materialistic. So Carlyle is very much contrasting walking humbly with God with being a prideful, materialistic person. And he seems to be primarily admiring Edmund because it would have been so easy for him, for a man with his power, to be hellish, to leave the earth to grow hellish, and just look after his materialism and just take the pleasures of the day. But he's admirable precisely because he did not do that. How then could he, not sumptuously with mammon, how then, now Carlyle's mocking, how then could he encourage trade, cause Howell and James and many wine merchants to bless him, and the tailor's heart, though in a very short-sighted manner, to sing for joy? Much in this Edmund's life is mysterious. So Carlyle is saying, it's funny, it's clearly the kind of leader that Edmund was is so unrecognizable in Carlyle's day as in ours, that Carlyle is saying, well, how could this unmaterialistic man who's not writing these treatises on the different laws and economic programs that he's doing, how can this man encourage trade? How can we, the modern thing about that is make the GDP go up. That's the line that every politician says. And Carlyle is clearly contrasting and mocking that perspective. Howell and James were a well-known Victorian London firm of luxury stationers, printers, and decorators, a fashionable shop on Regent Street in the 19th century. Carlyle often throws in references to contemporary commercial names to contrast serious heroic work with the trivial or decorative products of modern society. So, Carlyle is saying this king who is so loved, modern kind of economists would maybe ask, how is he going to make the stationery store produce more stationery? And clearly Carlyle shows Edmund was not about that. Lord Edmund was not about that. That he could, on occasion, do what he liked with his own is meanwhile evident enough. Certain heathen physical force ultra-chartists, Danes as they're called, it's so, to us in the modern day, especially me, not from the West, the English, the Danish, they seem like such civilized people, and here Carlyle is the way in which Carlyle roasts the Irish, the Danes, it's a pleasure to read. So, certain heathen physical force ultra-chartists, Danes as they were then called, coming into this territory with their 5 points, or rather their 5 and 20,000 points, and edges too, of pikes, namely, and battle axes, and proposing mere heathenism, confiscation, spoliation, and fire and sword. Edmund answered that Edmund answered that he would oppose to the utmost such savagery. Sorry, there's a cat. Okay. They took him prisoner, again required his sanction to set proposals. Edmund again refused. "Cannot we kill you?" cried they. "Cannot I die?" answered he. "My life, I think, is my own, to do what I like with." And he died under barbarous tortures, refusing to the last breath, and the ultra-Chartist Danes lost their propositions and went with their points and other apparatus, as is supposed to the devil, the father of them. So first, what's all this thing about the Danes and stuff? He's talking about Lord Edmund. So now we're in the year, based on our previous reading, we know that we're in the year 870. So Lord Edmund is reigning over, and he's a just king, and his people love him, etc. Then come the Danes, Danish people. Presumably they come across at the time, so as Carlyle refers, I forgot to mention that, let me see. He said somewhere, I could have sworn, I thought he said somewhere German Sea, and I did a double take. It was somewhere, I'm sure I read it. It was somewhere, he said German Sea, and I was like, what is the German Sea? They are talking about this place, the North Sea. So the one next to the UK, and on the other side is Denmark. That one is in Carlyle's time called the German Sea. So Carlyle is saying, let me just go back. Carlyle is saying these Danes came and they invaded that area of England, and they tried to get Lord Edmund, King Edmund, to assent to give consent to some of their reforms that they wanted to make. And King Edmund refused, and he was tortured and killed for it. So, and then the Danes lost their propositions. Now, this is interesting. Like, why would a force that has the right to obviously, or has the might, I shouldn't say right, has the might to kill the king, why would they even bother with his like acceptance, and why would they lose after they kill the king? I think it's because of a loss of legitimacy. Like, it would have been one thing if under duress, King Edmund made a deal with the Danes and so gave them legitimacy in his lands. But clearly he didn't, and he was killed, and therefore the Danes actually lost the divine rights of government, as they say. So we love the way Carlyle roasts the Danes. So he's calling them heathens, which are pagans, so non-Christian, physical force, ultra-Chartists. And then he's saying, after losing legitimacy, the Danes and went with their points and other apparatus to the devil, the father of them. So he's literally saying the Danish people are the spawn of the devil. Lord Edmund refused to accede to their plans and points and whatever it is they were making. I wanted to say something about these ultra-Chartists. It's interesting. So Chartists are obviously like a modern movement, modern in Carlyle's time, so it's a 19th century movement. So there's no like Chartists that are happening in the year 870 when the Danes with their battle axes are coming across. But it is interesting that Carlyle believes like the philosophy, the conquering philosophy of the Danes to be essentially that of the modern mindset. So that's why I want to read a little bit of this movement. A Chartist was a member or a supporter of the Chartist movement in Britain, 1830s to 1850s, a major working-class political movement demanding democratic reforms. So they were called Chartists because they wrote their demands on a document called the People's Charter. And what they wanted is universal male suffrage, secret ballot, no property requirement to serve in Parliament, Payment for members of the parliament. Does that imply that members of the parliament were not paid before? Interesting. Equal electoral districts, annual parliaments. So, yeah, they wanted to expand the franchise, and Carlyle thinks that the force that the Danes came with, they had this kind of democratizing reforms that they wanted, but they were repelled due to the sacrifice of Lord Edmund. Some say indeed, Some say indeed these Danes were not ultra-Chartists, but ultra-Tories, demanding to reap where they had not sown, and live in this world without working, though all the world should starve for it, which likewise seems a possible hypothesis. So, continuing the roast, and Tories obviously exist today. They are, I think, the conservative political government in the UK. Very much known, that same reputation exists in our time as in Carlyle's time, which is that Tories demand to reap. So they're basically a grift. So Carlyle is saying they want to reap stuff they have not sown. They want to not work. They just want to coast. And Carlyle is saying that could also be true. So the Danes are either like super democratizing force, or they're a very grifting type of force. Be what they might, they went, as we say, to the devil, and Edmund, doing what he liked with his own, so with his own life, the earth got cleared of them. So, Lord Edmund repelled the Danish forces. Another version is, so I think now we're going to get yet another explanation of what might have happened around the time of the Danes and the Lord Edmund. Another version is that Edmund, on this and the like occasions, stood by his order, the oldest and indeed only true order of nobility known under the stars. I'm just noticing that my video is a little, I like to lean like this, and the video is getting, let me see if I can rephrase it. Okay, I think this is going to be fine. Yeah, let's do that. Okay. Another version is that Edmund, on this and the like occasions, stood by his order, the oldest and indeed only true order of nobility known under the stars, that of just men and sons of God, in opposition to unjust and sons of Belial, that means devil, which latter indeed are second oldest, but yet are a very unvenerable order. This truly seems the likeliest hypothesis of all. Names and appearances alter so strangely in some half-score centuries, and all fluctuates chameleon-like, taking now this hue, now that. Thus much is very plain and does not change hue. Landlord Edmund was seen and felt by all men to have done verily a man's part in this life pilgrimage of his, and benedictions and outflowing love and admiration from the universal heart were his meed. Meed means the returns. Let me just say precisely, a deserved share or reward. So Carlyle is saying, truly, we can quibble over the details, and we can try to resurrect, sort of like Dryas does, the specific details of what he did. But really, when it comes down to it, it seems like Landlord Edmund is a man that walked with God, that did the right thing of his time, and therefore was very much loved for it. And we see another sort of persistent theme in Carlyle, which is that life is, black and white to Carlyle. You either walk with God or you're the son of the devil. So there are like two orders, the people that are going towards God and the people that are going towards Belial, towards the devil. So we see very much again, like with Carlyle, the lack of, I don't want to say nuance. I mean, obviously that is ridiculous to say. Carlyle is a very nuanced thinker and a person who has competence over so many areas, including math, history, literature. But I think like the more well-read he is, the more a man of his intellect, the more he sees like things as actually black and white. Actually, it's not that complicated. Actually, Lord Edmund, across all these centuries and all these details, and Carlyle has read them all. Like we saw, he obviously has read the accounts of Jocelyn, but he also read Monasticon. He also read many other things. Like Carlyle, every little reference as we've seen so far, he is a very, very well-read man. So the more he knows, the more he concludes that it is actually simple. It is actually, either God or devil. It's not that complicated. It reminds me of the current meme with the bell curve, where like the simplest and the most complex thinkers, or the least intelligent and the most intelligent, perceive the world in a similar way, and it's only the ones in the middle that are making things too complex and nuanced. So it's fascinating to see a reflection of that in Carlyle. I also loved like this phrase, life pilgrimage, life as a pilgrimage, and the idea. So obviously, like pilgrimage is an act of worship, or on a pilgrimage you are expected to be worshiping, or that's why you go on a pilgrimage. So Carlyle says this pilgrimage of Landlord Edmund, it was done right, it was done correctly. Interesting. Well done, cried the hearts of all men. They raised his slain and martyred body, washed his wounds with fast-flowing universal tears. I also love this, like, the universal heart. The universal heart. There's like a collective heart. It's not individualized. It's like the people, there's something in the air. The people know, and they love and admire. And it's like a supra-human thing. So the fast-flowing universal tears, tears of endless pity, and yet of a sacred joy and triumph. The beautifulest kind of tears, indeed perhaps the beautifulest kind of thing, like a sky, all flashing diamonds and prismatic radiance, all weeping, yet shone on by the everlasting sun. And this is not a sky, it is a soul and living face. Nothing like the temple of the highest, bright with some real effulgence of the highest, is seen in this world. Effulgence, real quick. Shining, brightly radiant. So here Carlyle is saying, having a lot of metaphors of like the sorrow of the people, and he's talking about them as if that's an organism of its own. So it has a universal heart, it has universal tears, and the tears on people's eyes, there's like, it flashes like diamonds, prismatic radiance. So when you look at a diamond, you don't see like one light coming from one cut of the diamond, right? You see it from like many different facets. So the people, each individually crying by themselves, together make a composition that is like that of a diamond. So interesting. There's like the collective sorrow is different from the individual sorrow, and it's a separate thing of its own. You know how people say like the sum is greater than the parts? That's the sense I get here. Like the sum of the sorrow of each individual person is greater than the individual sorrow of one person. And Carlyle is saying the beautifulest kind of tears, indeed perhaps the beautifulest kind of thing. What is that thing? It is the tears of pity and sacred joy and triumph. So this is like the tears of a true sacrifice, that because of the sacrifice, there was a triumph on those lands. And that is the most beautiful kind of thing, in Carlyle's opinion. Now comes an American roast. Oh, if all Yankee land follow a small good schnispel of the schnispel, the distinguished novelist, with blazing torches, dinner invitations, universal hip hip hurrah, feeling that he, though small, is something, how might all Engleland once follow a hero martyr and great true son of heaven? It is the very joy of man's heart. Oh, incredible sentence coming. It is the very joy of man's heart to admire where he can. Nothing so lifts him from all his mean imprisonments, were it but for moments, as true admiration. Okay, so the first part is just a roast, unnecessary roast at Americans. So Carlyle is saying, if all of the Americans follow basically a nobody, the Americans, Carlyle is painting us a picture that Americans follow fads, like they follow people clearly that are not like Edmund. They follow like temporary fads, such as this is not a real person, but like a Germanic-sounding name, the distinguished novelist, with blazing torches and dinner invitations. Like they're very effusive in their sort of admiration of nobodies, essentially, in Carlyle. Well, if they do that kind of stuff over there, can we just have like a true hero martyr in England? It is a great thing. Carlyle is like, by kind of putting the Americans down, actually Carlyle is sort of, or not putting them down, but by like contrasting what's happening in England with the Edmund admiration, he's contrasting that to what's happening in America with like following and admiring fads. Carlyle is saying, clearly implying that the virtue in England is higher, such that the people that we worship, the people that we admire, are those of the character of Saint Edmund's, or Lord Edmund's, as is time there. Because he has been sanctified later, but initially he was just killed by the Danes. And then comes this incredible sentence. It is the very joy of man's heart to admire where he can. Nothing so lifts him from all his mean imprisonments, were it but for moments as true admiration. So, the very joy of man's heart to admire, like admiration, and I love this like this simple word, mean imprisonment, paints such a picture. Like people are imprisoned, everyone is imprisoned by different things. They're imprisoned by events of the past, they're imprisoned by bad mental models, they're imprisoned by bad habits. Like there's a lot of kind of, in Carlyle's time as in ours, I feel like there's a lot of just problems with our psyche collectively and individually. And Carlyle is saying nothing just like lifts him out of this mean imprisonment. Nothing makes the heart filled with more joy and actually breaks the barriers of these imprisonments as true admiration. Incredible. Like this sentence alone, like you can ponder it, you can write theses in psychology about it. I love this sentence. Thus it has been said, all men, especially all women, so I think men is meant to say like all people, as we would say in modern times. So, thus it has been said, all men, especially all women, are born worshippers and will worship if it be but possible. So, just like captives want to get out of the prison, people have something in them that wants to get out of these mean imprisonments. And because Carlyle is arguing worship is the way out, Carlyle is saying there's like a part inside people that is a natural worshiper. That is not something you have to indoctrinate people. That is not something you have to teach them in schools. That is not something you have to try to do. Just like people are born drinkers of water, they are born worshipers. Possible to worship a something, even a small one. Not so possible a mere loud blaring nothing. What sight is more pathetic than that of poor multitudes of persons met to gaze at kings' progresses, Lord Mayors' shows, and other gilt gingerbread phenomena of the worshipful sort in these times, each so eager to worship, each with a dim fatal sense of disappointment, finding that he cannot rightly there. These be thy gods, Israel, and thou art so willing to worship, poor Israel. So I was like, first of all, what is this Israel thing? Clearly, it's not talking about the modern country. So I'll explain, and then we'll just meditate on this beautiful passage. These be thy gods, O Israel, is a direct reference to the story of the golden calf in the book of Exodus. When Moses is on Mount Sinai receiving the commandments, the Israelites get impatient, melt their jewelry, make a golden idol, and worship it. Aaron presents it to them by saying, "These be thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee up out of Egypt." It is one of the clearest biblical examples of idolatry, worshiping something false and trivial instead of something true. I will say, I know it's a serious passage on idolatry or whatever, but I just realized some of the things seem so alien, like the idea that you're wanting to worship something and then you get impatient, and so you melt the gold jewelry and make an idol and worship it. It's just in some ways it's a time so foreign to us. But the truth of it, or the part that is translatable to Carlyle's time clearly, is the one where saying as they're worshiping something false, they're impatient, right? They're hoping to worship something, they get impatient, and then they do this fake worship instead. They, as a sort of second-rate version of the real thing, it's idolatry. That is idolatry, Carlyle is saying, well, we have our own idolatry, and those are the King's Progresses, Lord Mayor's shows. So these are clearly, as we call breads and circuses, these are the circus parts, entertainment. Whatever entertainment there is of Carlyle's time, he's looking upon the faces of people, and he's seeing these people, they want to touch the real thing. They want actual worship. They want to be able to worship something real. It can be something small, Carlyle is saying. Possible to worship something, even a small one. It doesn't need to be grandiose, but it has to be real. And Carlyle is saying that all these things, the entertainments of his day, whatever is going on in his day, that's a loud, blaring nothing, and that's not possible to be worshipped. You can see the dim, fatal sense of disappointment in people's eyes that have come there to worship something and that are just being greeted with a loud, blaring nothing, not of the real thing. In this manner, was I going to say? Yeah, no, I think I said everything I want to say. In this manner, however, did the men of the eastern counties take up the slain body of their Edmund, where it lay cast forth in the village of Hoxne, seek out the severed head, and reverently reunite the same. They embalmed him with myrrh and sweet spices, with love, pity, and all high and awful thoughts, consecrating him with a very storm of melodious, adoring admiration, and sun-dyed showers of tears, joyfully yet with awe, as all deep joy has something of the awful in it, commemorating his noble deeds and godlike walk and conversation while on earth, till at length the very Pope and Cardinals at Rome were forced to hear of it, and they, summing up as correctly as they well could, with advocatus diaboli, that's devil's advocate pleadings, and their other forms of process, the general verdict of mankind declared that he in very fact, led a hero's life in this world, and being now gone, was gone as they conceived to God above, and reaping his reward there. So he became, Rome sanctified him. That's how Edmund, the landlord, became Saint Edmund. Such, they said, was the best judgment they could form of the case, and truly not a bad judgment. Acquiescent, zealously adopted with full assent of private judgment by all mortals. So, Carlyle is saying, in this manner being in a manner of being eager to worship, the men of eastern counties took up the slain body, the one that was tortured and killed by the Danish people, and the head was severed. So they found Edmund's body, they found Edmund's head, they reunited them, they embalmed the corpse, and with a lot of love and adoration and like songs and ritual, and sacred sort of ritual, they commemorated him and whatever he did on earth. They recounted his good deeds, to the point that from this place in England all the way to Rome, the news reached Rome, and the bishops went through their processes and declared the verdict that this man was actually a hero's life. So here we see, like, when Carlyle says somebody's a hero, it's a hero's life. That's very much the same as saying the man walked with God in God's path. These are like synonyms in Carlyle's opinion. So he walked a hero's life, and now the bishops and the Pope is saying, and now that he's gone, we believe, it's our judgment, that he is with God, meaning he is a saint. He was a saint. We're sanctifying him. That's the best judgment they had, and it was acquiesced and zealously adopted with full assent of private judgment by all mortals. So everyone universally agreed that Edmund should be a saint. This was not like an ambiguous case. Another part of the history that, like, we see glimpses of here is that the people that found the body of Edmund in the village of Hoxne, and that is like still a place. You can search it on Google Maps, and it's like this red place over here. Sorry, 1 second. Yeah, this red place over here, close to the Bury of St. Edmund's. So that's clearly where the Danes had confronted Edmund, and that's where they buried him. Or killed him, and that's where the people found him and did this whole embalming and other rituals. So again, like, the fact that a 1,000-year-old village is something you can still search on a Google map is just a uniquely English thing, I think. All right, let's see. The rest of St. Edmund's story. The rest of St. Edmund's history for the readers sees he has now become a saint is easily conceivable. Pious munificence provided him a loculus, a ferratum, or shrine, built for him a wooden chapel, a stone temple, ever widening and growing by new pious gifts, such the overflowing heart feels it a blessedness to solace itself by giving. Wow. So Carlyle is saying, the point after St. Edmund becomes a saint, that's like easier. We can conceptualize that better compared to everything up to that point, right? The point where how St. Edmund ruled, precisely what the conflict with the Danes was, and what got people to the point of admiring him, to resurrect him, the point at which he was sanctified. Like, that is a very human, very kind of turbulent process that we don't have a lot of details in. But after he has become a saint, after the thing has been made official, that's easier for us to conceptualize. So Carlyle is saying he got a pious munificence. So again, he's like personifying certain feelings people have. So that munificence means generous giving, great liberality in donating. So people that felt generous and they were pious, they provided St. Edmund a loculus, which is a small coffin or container for holy relics. So they provided some holy relics to this to this place. Ferratum, a portable shrine or bier used to carry a saint's body or relics. So again, they were generous with their gifts. Now the incredible kind of closing line by Carlyle. He says, "Such the overflowing heart feels it a blessedness to solace itself by giving. So the overflowing heart, like it's saying people are giving things, they're contributing to the place of St. Edmund's location with like holy relics, and what they get out of this is solace. They feel it is a blessedness to solace itself by giving. The blessings they receive by contributing these things to St. Edmundsbury, the overflowing heart receives as solace. St. Edmund's shrine glitters now with diamond flowerages, with a plating of wrought gold. Wrought means shaped or worked by hand, not cast or left raw. So now St. Edmundsbury is rich because people are contributing stuff to it. So it glitters with diamond flowerages, with gold. The wooden chapel, as we say, has become a stone temple. So it was a humble place of memory of this king that people loved. After it is canonized, and after the generosity of the neighboring places start pouring in, it now becomes a stone temple. It also shows like the process of canonization being an important part in people's memory. So once it is official, you both get more resources and you also become more permanent. Stately masonries, long-drawn arches, cloisters, surrounding aisles buttress it, begirdle it far and wide. So now, from a humble little place, it's become a whole chapel. Cloisters means a covered walkway in a monastery, usually surrounding a courtyard. I got some images here, which I thought was interesting. So if this is like the chapel area, the cloister refers to these areas under these arches around the courtyard, where like part of it is fully closed, they're the walls, and the other side is fully open, and you walk around them. So it's like a shaded area around the courtyard. So as we can tell from these images, like there's a lot of investment made into St. Edmund's shrine with both resources as well as architectural permanence. Regimented companies of men, of whom our Jocelyn is one, devote themselves in every generation to meditate here on man's nobleness and awfulness, and celebrate and show forth the same as they best can, thinking they will do it better here in presence of God the Maker, and of the so awful and so noble made by him. In one word, St. Edmund's body has raised a monastery around it. I love this like image, how now that there are resources and now it's a place of worship with like the infrastructure and the wealth and the resources of a place like that, generations of men now go there. They are contemplating, meditating on man's nobleness and awfulness. And it's as if the St. Edmund's body, so the sacrifice of St. Edmund, it didn't just end in the year 870 when he prevented the Danes from taking over that area, but like that sacrifice has birthed a monastery. It has raised a monastery. You know, one man died, a monastery was erected. To such length, in such manner, has the spirit of the time visibly taken body and crystallized itself there. The spirit of the time, the one that was admiring Saint Edmund, the one that worshipped, and worship sounds idolatrous, but like that truly admired this man and went all the way, such that they advocated all the way to the Pope to have him canonized. That spirit of the time crystallized itself into an architecture, an actual monastery. The idea that like architecture is the end process of the spirit of the time is so interesting. And this is why when you look at the architecture of a place, you can like see in some way, like you're seeing the spirit that caused that architecture to be built. New gifts, houses, farms, Katala, ever come in. Katala, did I read it? Oh, it's like cattle. So basically resources. Again, new gifts, houses, farms, Katala, come ever in. King Knut, whom men call Canute, whom the ocean tide would not be forbidden to wet. We heard already of this wise king with his crown and gifts, but many others, kings, queens, wise men, and noble loyal women. Let dry as dust and divine silence be the record. Beatrix's worth has become St. Edmund's bury, and lasts visible to this hour. All this that thou now seest, namest Bury Town, is properly the funeral monument of Saint or Landlord Edmund. The present respectable mayor of Bury may be said, like a fakir, little as he thinks of it, to have his dwelling in the extensive, many-sculptured tombstone of St. Edmund. In one of the brick niches of thereof dwells the present respectable mayor of Bury. So Carlyle is very much reframing the residents of the town. He's saying this is a place where St. Edmund was buried, and through his sacrifice and through the spirit of the time, crystallizing themselves in this person, a monastery was raised, and the resources of the monastery came in. So wise men, kings, as we know, King Canute had contributed his gold crown to the monastery. So lots of gifts and donations were made to the monastery, and to the point that a town now was erected around it. But Carlyle is saying, let's keep the perspective. All of this happened because St. Edmund was martyred, and so in some sense, all of this is an extended burial ground of St. Edmund. It's his funeral location, funeral monument. It's a man's funeral monument, and we all, including the mayor, including the one that has the most resources in that town, including that person, we're just basically funeral groundskeepers. There were a couple of references here. So one of the question I had is, why does Carlyle seems to make a point of saying Knut or Canute, like why can't you just pick one and say that? So I asked ChatGPT, and it's just the two historical spellings of the same Danish king's name. So I think it's just Carlyle uses both to echo old chronicles. And then I was like, what is this ocean tide thing about? So first, another interesting thing, obviously, is that this is a Danish king, and St. Edmund was martyred by Danes. So clearly by the time of King Canute, the Danes, or at least this Danish king, is very much on the side of St. Edmund. And then I was like, what is this ocean tide thing about? So this refers to the famous story where King Canute demonstrated he had no power to command the sea, letting the tide wash over him to prove a king's authority has limits. So clearly people were demanding a little bit too much of him. And he's saying, I cannot literally, I'm a king, but I cannot literally change nature. And so that's that. And then the fakir thing, fakir means a holy ascetic in India who lives a very simple and humble, often in humble or unusual places, right? So it's an ascetic. And so he's saying even the mayor, like a mere administrative person, he is basically like a religious funeral groundskeeper of St. Edmund's monument. As secular as he may be, as mundane as his duties may be, that's functionally his role in this location, because the whole location is a monument to St. Edmund. Certain times do crystallize themselves in a magnificent manner, and others perhaps are like to do it in a rather shabby one. So, Carlyle is saying certain times the spirit of the times crystallize themselves occasionally magnificently and sometimes shabbily, but they do crystallize themselves. But Richard Arkwright, so this is the person associated with the Industrial Revolution that we saw from previous readings, an industrialist. Richard Arkwright too will have his monument 1,000 years hence, all Lancashire and Yorkshire, and how many other shires and counties with their machineries and industries for his monument. A true pyramid, pyramid doesn't actually come from pyro and mountain, but Carlyle is making a sort of verbal association. A true pyramid or flame mountain, flaming with the steam fires and useful labor over wide continents, usefully towards the stars, to a certain height, how much grander than your foolish Cheops pyramids or Saqqara clay ones. Let us withal be hopeful, be content or patient. So Carlyle is saying the spirit of the times produce monuments and they become artifacts that we pass on to the next generations. In St. Edmund's time, the spirit of that time created a monastery. They created loving rituals. It created a canonized saint. It created this monastery. It created the place that people gave gifts and resources to. And eventually it created a town that now feels like the whole place is a monument to St. Edmund. That is what the spirit of the times of St. Edmund canonized, or crystallized. And Carlyle is saying there will be a monument for the current spirit of the times, which is the Gospel of Arkwright, as Carlyle referred to previously. And that is the sort of industrial machinery, labor, useful labor, steam fires, that kind of spirit of the times, which is very much the mechanistic, industrial spirit. That too will have its monuments that we pass on to the next generations. And it also here shows something of impermanence, because the spirit of the times of St. Edmund clearly are not the spirit of the times of Carlyle's day. So after, it crystallizes itself in a monastery, but the spirit of the time passes. So I think Carlyle similarly is thinking this industrial fervor that we are all spinning up, and we have all these laborers and machines all across the nation. The spirit of the times here, that too will get its monument and will pass, and something else will give way. The references here, Cheops pyramids, I'd never heard of this. That's the big pyramid that we all know. It's the Pyramid of Giza. Saqqara clay ones, that's this pyramid. Yeah, I don't know why I looked up the person of condition. That may have been something a little bit before, but it just means a socially important or well-born person. There are some notes here. I think it's a little bit, I'll read it, but I think it's not that important. So if I go here, some 3 centuries or so had elapsed since Beatrixworth became St. Edmund's Stowe, St. Edmund's town and monastery. So Carlyle is going to say a little bit about this Beatrixworth. So the name of the location where St. Edmund's Bury is today, that location, what it was before, was Beatrixworth. And so Carlyle is going to tell us a little bit about that name, which is clearly a Germanic name. He's going to say dry as dust. So Carlyle is speaking through this kind of chronicler, very meticulous, very data-driven chronicler of the past. Dry as dust puzzles and pokes for some biographic of this Beadric and repugns to consider him a mere East Anglican. That's why I put person of condition. So just an important person. Who was this Beadric? Dry as dust, the chronicler of the past wants to know. And finally settles that it's just some important person, not in need of a biography, whose something worth, that is to say growth, increase, or as we should now name it, estate, that same hamlet or wood mansion now St. Edmund's Bury originally was. So there was some important person, his name was Beadric, We don't know much about him, and it's not really that worthy to know that much about him. But his mansion is where St. Edmundsbury currently is. 4 adds our erudite friend, which is dry as dust, the chronicler. The Saxon something equivalent to the German werden means to grow, to become, traces of which old vocabule are still found on the North Country dialect, such as what is word of him, meaning what is become of him, and the like. Nay, we in modern English say, woe worth the hour, woe befall the hour, and speak of the weird sisters, not to mention the innumerable other names of places still ending in worth or worth. And indeed, our common noun worth, in the sense of value, does not this mean simply what a thing has grown to, what a man has grown to, how much he amounts to, by the threadneedle street standard and another. So, Carlyle is making a note of even a more historic time, before St. Edmundsbury, before Edmunds himself, of this time, but clearly saying, even though, you would expect, the dry as dust perspective is to say something about this Beadrick and what he was doing and what his titles were, and say something about his governance. But really, we see a contrast between this dry as dust approach and Carlyle's approach, where Carlyle focuses on the worth. The location of the place was called, if we go back, Beadrick's Worth, right? So dry as dust would focus on Beadrick, who Beadrick was. Carlyle focuses on worth. Carlyle focuses on this German word and what that tells us about the roots of English and what that tells us about other places that end in worth. So you can just tell, Carlyle, the opinionated part of Carlyle comes through with the things he chooses to focus on, the things he repeats, the things he relegates to dry as dust versus the things he says in first person. So very lovely chapter. Thank you for joining me for this reading of Past and Present by Thomas Carlyle, Book 2, The Ancient Monk, Chapter 3, Landlord Edmund.